Ladies and gentlemen, friends, and fellow citizens, thank you for gathering here today. I want to begin with a simple but urgent statement. Something big is about to hit America. It's not a prediction based on speculation. It's an assessment grounded in the realities of economics, geopolitics, and the trajectory of our nation's policies. Too often, people assume that crises arrive overnight like a thunderstorm. In truth, they build slowly, brick by brick, until the structure is so fragile that the slightest shock can bring it crashing down. That is where America stands right now, on the brink of a profound turning point. America today stands at a crossroads, a fragile moment in history when the decisions we make or fail to make will determine the trajectory of the nation for decades to come. When I say America is on the brink of a major shift, it is not a dramatic flourish, but a sober reality drawn from patterns we have seen across the centuries. Every society reaches inflection points when its priorities, resources, and leadership are tested against the pressures of both domestic challenges and global currents. In such times, complacency is the greatest danger. The assumption that the future will simply continue as the past is not only naive, but historically false. Something big is indeed approaching, and whether it strikes as crisis or as transformation depends entirely on whether America awakens to the urgency of this moment. Consider the way our national resources are distributed. For decades, the United States has poured vast sums into military engagements overseas, often under the belief that such dominance guarantees safety and influence. Yet back home, millions of Americans face deteriorating public schools, collapsing bridges, rising homelessness, and health care systems that leave families drowning in debt. This contradiction is more than a budgetary imbalance. It is a signal of misaligned priorities that erode national strength from within. What good is it to claim superpower status when the very foundations of our society crack under the weight of neglect? The shift that is coming will expose this imbalance in ways too obvious to ignore, forcing Americans to confront the reality that power cannot be sustained abroad if it is crumbling at home. The hook here is simple. We cannot keep playing empire while the empire itself is hollowing out. History has shown, again and again, that external power without internal stability collapses like a house of cards. Rome expanded far and wide, but neglected its citizens until unrest tore it apart. Britain ruled vast territories, but sank under the weight of its own domestic weaknesses and unsustainable wars. America now faces the same perilous cycle, convinced that foreign ventures can secure its future while ignoring that the true measure of national strength lies in the prosperity, health, and unity of its people. This is why the looming shift is not merely a geopolitical tremor, but a structural reckoning. If one listens closely, the warning signs are everywhere. Poll after poll reveals that Americans no longer trust their government or its leaders. Communities feel abandoned, their voices drowned out by corporate lobbying and partisan bickering. Inequality has widened so drastically that the promise of the American dream feels more myth than reality for the majority. At the same time, crises like climate change, pandemics, and technological disruption accelerate faster than our institutions can respond. These pressures accumulate quietly, often dismissed as temporary setbacks, but together they form the undercurrents of a storm. When that storm breaks, the nation will not simply bend, it risks being reshaped entirely. That is the magnitude of the shift. I speak of a transformation that will redefine America, whether we are prepared for it or not. And yet, we must resist the fatalism that often accompanies such warnings. The fact that we are on the brink does not mean the outcome is predetermined. The very awareness of the danger can be the catalyst for change. The shift that is coming can either expose our weaknesses or inspire us to finally address them with urgency and resolve. Imagine a future in which America recognizes that true security comes not from endless war spending, but from educating its children, protecting its environment, ensuring health care for all, and fostering diplomacy rather than division. That is not idealism. It is pragmatism rooted in the reality that a strong nation is one that invests in its people first. The question then becomes, will America act before it is too late? Will leaders step beyond the paralysis of partisan games to confront the issues that truly matter? Will citizens demand accountability and vision from those in power, or will we drift further into distraction, allowing the coming shift to strike us unprepared? These are not rhetorical questions. They are the very choices that will decide whether the big event ahead is collapse or renewal. The stakes could not be higher, and the clock is already ticking. The truth is that America has immense capacity to adapt, to rebuild, and to lead in ways that are constructive rather than destructive. But adaptation requires honesty, and honesty requires courage. And it requires admitting that the current path is unsustainable, and that we cannot continue to export democracy abroad while it frays at home. It requires seeing that the greatest threat to America is not an enemy overseas, but the erosion of trust, unity, and shared purpose within our own borders. If we can face these truths head on, the shift ahead could be one of revitalization rather than decline. Something big is indeed about to hit America, and pretending otherwise will not shield us from it. The only question is whether we will meet it with denial or with determination. That choice will define not just the next election cycle, but the future of generations yet to come. Throughout history, one of the greatest illusions that empires have held is the belief that they are untouchable, that their dominance will stretch indefinitely into the future. The American narrative today risks falling into this same trap, repeating the mistakes of past empires like Rome and Britain, which rose to global prominence only to be undone by their own internal contradictions. When Jeffrey Sachs warns that America is repeating the mistakes of past empires, he is pointing to a dangerous pattern: the overextension of resources on foreign wars, the neglect of domestic well-being, and the arrogance of assuming that immense military power can mask deep vulnerabilities at home. The hook here is undeniable. History is not just an old story, it is a mirror, and what we see in that reflection today should shake us out of complacency. Rome at its height commanded vast territories, but as its legions marched outward, the empire turned inwardly fragile. Roads and aqueducts that once symbolized strength fell into disrepair, while economic inequality left citizens disillusioned. Britain, centuries later, ruled over colonies spanning continents, but the weight of war and the neglect of its own working class hollowed its core. America today stands on a similar precipice. We have the world's most powerful military and spend more on defense than the next several nations combined. Yet our schools struggle for funding. Our public health system buckles under strain, and millions of citizens live paycheck to paycheck. The signs are clear. Like past empires, we risk believing that military might is a substitute for domestic stability. The second hook, and perhaps the most dangerous illusion, lies in the idea that wars abroad can be fought without consequences at home. Time and again, empires believed they could wage endless battles without draining their vitality. But wars are not fought with abstract numbers. They are fought with treasure, human lives, and public trust. America's ongoing foreign entanglements drain not only our financial resources, but also the attention and credibility of our leadership. The money spent maintaining military bases across the globe could rebuild our crumbling infrastructure or fund universal health care. Yet it is poured into maintaining illusions of dominance. Citizens begin to ask, if trillions can be spent overseas, why can't we fix what is broken here at home? That question is the fault line of every empire, and America is no exception. There is also the cultural cost. Past empires often lost sight of the needs of their people, growing distant and unresponsive to the struggles of ordinary citizens. Rome faced bread riots, Britain endured labor strikes, and America today grapples with protests born from inequality, systemic injustice, and political disillusionment. These are not isolated flare ups, they are symptoms of a deeper malaise. The American people increasingly sense that their voices matter less than the interests of corporate lobbies and military contractors. That erosion of trust in government is a hallmark of imperial decline when citizens no longer believe their leaders act in their best interests. Once trust is lost, the social contract weakens, and no amount of military might can repair that fracture. Another hook emerges from the economic realm. Empires often believed their wealth was limitless, only to wake up to the reality of mounting debt and unsustainable commitments. America's reliance on debt to finance wars, tax cuts, and ever expanding defense budget mirrors the fiscal recklessness that hastened the decline of Britain after World War II. Already, the U.S. faces warnings about its ballooning national debt, rising interest rates, and the fragility of its currency dominance. Just as Britain ceded global economic leadership to the United States in the mid 20th century, America may find itself displaced by new powers rising with discipline and strategy. This is not theoretical. It is the practical trajectory of decline that repeats across centuries. But the repetition of history does not have to be destiny. The awareness of these patterns can itself be the turning point. unlike Rome or Britain, America has the benefit of hindsight and the voices of scholars, economists, and citizens warning of the dangers. The question is whether those warnings will be heard or drowned out by the clamor of short-term politics and military adventurism, or if leaders choose humility over arrogance, diplomacy over conflict, and investment at home over dominance abroad, the cycle can be broken. The recognition that the greatest threats are not foreign enemies, but domestic neglect could redirect the nation before the shift becomes irreversible. Still, the urgency cannot be overstated. The decline of past empires often seemed unthinkable until it happened, and then it happened quickly. Rome did not collapse in one day, but the cracks were visible long before the walls fell. Britain did not expect its global empire to crumble within decades, but its overreach left it weakened beyond repair. America, too, may find that the big moment arrives sooner than expected, catalyzed by an economic crisis, a political rupture, or a global realignment. The repetition of history is not abstract. It is real, and it is unfolding in front of us. Look, the choice to recognize it or ignore it will determine whether America writes a new chapter of renewal or follows the old script of decline. The global order, as we have known it for decades, is undergoing a profound transformation, and America finds itself at the center of this shift, often unwilling to acknowledge just how fast the balance of power is changing. For much of the post-World War II era, the United States stood unrivaled in its economic, military, and diplomatic influence, shaping alliances and institutions that reflected its interests and values. But the world of today is no longer the world of 1945 or even 1991. Emerging powers are rising, regional alliances are strengthening, and the assumptions of unchallenged U.S. dominance are being tested in real time. The hook here is this: America's greatest threat may not come from a single adversary, but from its own refusal to adapt to a multipolar world that is already here. Across Asia, the Middle East, Africa, and Latin America, nations are no longer content to play by rules written exclusively in Washington. China has established itself as a formidable economic powerhouse, building global infrastructure through its Belt and Road Initiative, and positioning itself as a central player in technology, trade, and finance. India, with its vast population and accelerating economic growth, is carving its own role as both a regional and global force. Russia, despite sanctions and isolation from the West, continues to exert influence through energy, diplomacy, and military power. And perhaps most strikingly, countries of the global South, long marginalized in global decision making, are finding common cause, forming new economic partnerships, and asserting independence from Western dominance. Together, these movements mark a decisive departure from the unipolar moment that America has taken for granted. The reality is that the world is no longer revolving around a single pole of power. Instead, it is becoming multipolar, a system where influence is distributed across multiple centers. This shift is not inherently hostile to the United States, but it does demand humility and adjustment. Yet too often, U.S. policymakers respond with denial or confrontation, clinging to the notion that America must remain the sole leader at any cost. That posture is not only unsustainable, it is dangerous. The more America insists on asserting dominance rather than embracing cooperation, the more isolated it risks becoming in a world that is learning to move on without it. One of the clearest signs of this shift is in the realm of global trade and finance. Countries are increasingly seeking alternatives to the US dollar, building regional systems of exchange and experimenting with new technologies like digital currencies. While the dollar remains powerful, its absolute dominance is no longer guaranteed. This trend should be a wake up call. America's financial leverage, long a cornerstone of its global power, is being quietly eroded. If Washington fails to adjust, the nation may find itself blindsided by the speed at which its economic influence diminishes. But economics is only part of the story. Diplomacy and security are also being reshaped. Organizations such as BRIAS are expanding, drawing in countries eager to participate in frameworks not dictated by Washington or Brussels. Regional blocs in Africa and Latin America are becoming more assertive, insisting on partnerships based on equality rather than dependency. These developments should not be viewed as threats, but as realities of a maturing global system. Yet, when America interprets every assertion of independence as hostility, it risks turning natural shifts into unnecessary conflicts. Here lies another hook that must not be ignored. The greatest power is not the ability to coerce, but the ability to cooperate. For decades, America believed that global dominance required military supremacy and unilateral control. But in a world that is moving toward interdependence, lasting influence will belong to those who build trust, create mutual benefit, and engage with respect. If America can adapt to this reality, it can continue to play a vital leadership role. If it refuses, it will watch from the sidelines as new alliances set the agenda. The choice then is stark. America can recognize that the age of sole dominance is over and that the path forward lies in diplomacy, shared responsibility, and genuine partnership, or it can cling to the illusion of unchallenged power and see its influence unravel more rapidly than it ever imagined. The shift in global power balance is not a distant possibility. It is already underway, reshaping the foundations of international relations. Whether America meets it with wisdom or denial will determine the nation's place in the world for generations to come. For generations, the dominance of the US dollar has been one of the pillars of America's global power. It has allowed the United States to borrow at low cost, to impose sanctions with extraordinary reach, and to project influence far beyond what its military alone could secure. The dollar has been more than just a currency. It has been a weapon, a shield, and a symbol of American authority. Yet that dominance is no longer unquestioned. Across the world, countries are seeking alternatives, quietly building systems that reduce their dependence on the dollar. The hook here is clear. America's financial supremacy, long assumed to be permanent, is facing erosion, and the consequences could be nothing short of transformational for the global order. The first signs of this shift are already visible. Nations like China and Russia are increasingly settling trade in their own currencies, bypassing the dollar altogether. Regional blocs are experimenting with new financial frameworks, from bilateral currency swaps to the exploration of digital currencies that do not rely on USE controlled systems. Even traditional allies have begun to question the risks of over-reliance on the dollar, particularly as Washington has used its financial system as a tool of foreign policy. The very instrument that once gave America unparalleled leverage, its ability to freeze assets, block transactions, and control global flows, has spurred others to find ways around it. History shows that when countries feel constrained, they innovate, and that innovation is now directed at weakening the dollar's grip. The danger for the United States is not only the gradual loss of financial dominance, but also the speed with which trust can shift in moments of crisis. Just as the British pound ceded its role as the world's reserve currency in the mid 20th century, the dollar could find its supremacy undermined in ways that seem sudden, but are in truth the result of long building discontent. Once confidence begins to erode, the fall can be rapid. The hook is that the world does not need to completely abandon the dollar for America to feel the impact. Even a partial move away would mean higher borrowing costs, reduced influence, and diminished ability to respond to global challenges. Domestically, the consequences would be profound. For decades, Americans have benefited from the privileges of the dollar's status, enjoying cheaper imports, easier access to credit, and a lifestyle that could be sustained in part by the willingness of other nations to hold U.S. debt. If that willingness weakens, the ripple effects would be felt in rising prices, greater inequality, and increased strain on public programs already under pressure. In other words, the financial cushion that has allowed America to live beyond its means would thin dramatically, leaving the nation vulnerable in ways many cannot yet imagine. Yet this is not simply an economic story. It is a story of perception and politics. When countries around the world see America weaponize the dollar to punish adversaries, they are reminded of the risks of dependence. The more aggressively Washington wields its financial system as a tool of coercion, the more incentive others have to build alternatives. What was once a source of unrivaled strength has become paradoxically a motivator for the rest of the world to accelerate its departure from the system. That irony is the kind of historical twist that often marks the decline of great powers. The very mechanisms of dominance sow the seeds of their weakening. The deeper danger lies in America's complacency. Too many policymakers still treat the dollar's supremacy as eternal, failing to prepare for a future where it is contested. They overlook the fact that younger powers are not bound by the traditions of the past. That technology has made financial innovation faster and more disruptive than ever, and that the world's frustrations with American dominance are not just rhetorical. They are being translated into new systems and institutions. To ignore this is to sleepwalk into a storm. But as with all looming crises, awareness can create opportunity. The decline of the dollar's unchallenged supremacy does not have to spell disaster. if America adapts by embracing cooperation, building financial resilience at home, and leading through fairness rather than coercion. The hooks of history remind us that currency dominance is never permanent, but also that nations which adapt can reinvent their roles in new systems. America still has the tools to remain central in the global economy, but only if it acknowledges the challenge rather than pretending it does not exist. The warning signs are flashing, and the choice is whether to prepare or to stumble blindly into a future shaped by others. When we look back at America's history, we see echoes of past mistakes reverberating into the present. And one of the most striking parallels is with the Vietnam era. Jeffrey Sachs' warning is not simply about a distant historical analogy. It is about recognizing how deeply the United States is once again trapped in the cycle of endless wars abroad while neglecting the needs of its own people at home. The hook is this: history may not repeat in the exact same form, but the rhythms are unmistakable, and America is walking dangerously in step with patterns that led to turmoil, division, and disillusionment half a century ago. During the 1960s and 70s, the United States poured immense resources into Vietnam, convinced that military escalation was necessary to preserve its global standing. Yet that investment brought little but tragedy. Tens of thousands of American lives lost, millions of Vietnamese civilians killed, and a nation at home increasingly fractured by protest, distrust, and anger. Meanwhile, the domestic front suffered as social programs were underfunded, poverty persisted, and divisions deepened across communities. The war drained not only the economy, but also the public's faith in leadership, leaving scars that shaped American politics for generations. Today, the pattern looks hauntingly familiar. In Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and beyond, the United States has waged costly wars with uncertain outcomes, justified as necessary for security, but often yielding instability and resentment rather than peace. Trillions of dollars have been spent on these interventions, yet when Americans look around their own cities, they see collapsing infrastructure, rising homelessness, underfunded schools, and a healthcare system that continues to leave millions vulnerable. The parallel to Vietnam is stark once again. Resources that could build a stronger, fairer society at home are being siphoned into conflicts that bring neither victory nor stability abroad. The hook here is unsettling. When a nation invests more in destruction overseas than in construction at home, it is only a matter of time before its foundations weaken. Just as in the Vietnam era, the current path fuels deep social divisions. In the late 60s, protests filled the streets as Americans demanded answers about why their sons were being sent to die in a war that increasingly seemed unwinnable. Trust in government collapsed as officials concealed the true costs and realities of the conflict. Today, while the draft no longer exists, the sense of disillusionment is just as palpable. Citizens ask why trillions can be found for foreign wars while their communities crumble. They question why leaders prioritize defense contractors over teachers, nurses, and workers. This erosion of trust is not a side effect. It is a symptom of a deeper sickness that history has already shown us can destabilize a nation. Another layer of the parallel lies in the international perception of American power. During Vietnam, the world watched as the United States squandered its credibility by pursuing a war most recognized as futile. Allies doubted Washington's judgment, adversaries capitalized on its missteps, and the image of America as a beacon of democracy was deeply tarnished. Today, U.S. foreign policy is once again raising questions about its wisdom and motives. Endless military interventions, often justified under shifting rationales, have left allies skeptical and adversaries emboldened. History's lesson is clear. Overextension abroad weakens influence. It does not secure it. The hook here is that global respect cannot be bought with bombs. It must be earned with wisdom, restraint, and genuine leadership. Perhaps the most haunting echo, though, is the way war corrodes the social fabric. The Vietnam era left behind a nation divided not only politically, but culturally, with generations scarred by mistrust of institutions. That mistrust persists today, fueled by the sense that America's priorities are upside down. The wars of the last 2 decades have left veterans struggling with trauma and neglect, families bearing the invisible costs, and citizens feeling alienated from a government that seems deaf to their concerns. Just as in the 1970s, cynicism and anger spread when people see leaders repeat mistakes rather than learn from them. Yet history also offers a warning wrapped in opportunity. America eventually pulled back from Vietnam, but only after immense loss and upheaval. The tragedy is that the lessons were not fully absorbed, allowing the cycle to repeat in new forms. Today, the choice remains open, Z, to continue down the same path of overextension, division, and disillusionment, or to break the pattern by recentering national priorities on peace, diplomacy, and domestic renewal. The hook that should capture every citizen's attention is this: if we fail to act now, we may find ourselves reliving the worst chapters of our history, only this time with stakes even higher. The crossroads America faces today is unlike anything seen in its recent history. And the choice that lies before the nation is stark crisis or renewal. Jeffrey Sachs emphasizes that the something big approaching is not an act of fate, not a sudden twist of fortune, but the natural consequence of decades of decisions made in Washington and across American institutions. That is the hook. This moment is not destiny, it is consequence. And because it is consequence, it can still be shaped. The difference between collapse and renewal will depend on whether leaders and citizens recognize the urgency to act before the momentum of decline becomes irreversible. The nature of consequence is that it reveals itself slowly, then all at once. The erosion of trust in government, the deepening inequality, the overextension abroad, and the neglect of domestic well-being have built up year after year, often ignored in favor of short-term gains or political theater. The American public now feels the weight of those choices in very real ways. The cost of living outpaces wages. Health care remains inaccessible to millions. Infrastructure crumbles, and the nation's global standing grows increasingly contested. The storm that is coming is not a surprise. It is the inevitable result of misaligned priorities. The hook here is that Americans are not powerless bystanders. They are witnesses to warning signs that can still be addressed if the will to change exists. Crisis looms if denial and arrogance continue to guide policy. A nation that spends trillions on war while neglecting its people creates the perfect conditions for social unrest and political fracture. The polarization visible in America today is not an accident. It is the predictable outcome of a system that has ignored the needs of its citizens for too long. History shows us that when societies reach this level of disillusionment, institutions weaken, trust collapses, and democracy itself becomes fragile. The risk is not abstract. The hook is chilling in its simplicity. America's greatest danger comes not from an external enemy, but from its own failure to meet the needs of its people. And yet, renewal is not only possible, it is within reach if the nation makes the right choices. Imagine an America that invests with seriousness in its future, rebuilding its infrastructure with green technology, ensuring universal health care, tackling inequality through fair taxation, and fostering education systems that prepare young people for the challenges of a changing world. These are not impossible dreams. They are practical solutions that have been delayed by misdirected priorities. Renewal would mean shifting the measure of American strength away from weapons stockpiles and military bases toward the health, prosperity, and innovation of its people. The hook here is that real power in the 21st century will not come from domination, but from resilience, and resilience can only be built from within. The decision before America also extends to the global stage. Renewal would mean embracing diplomacy and cooperation rather than doubling down on confrontation. In a multipolar world, humility will be more valuable than arrogance, partnership more effective than unilateralism. A choice for renewal would reestablish America not as a domineering force, but as a respected leader in addressing shared challenges like climate change, pandemics, and global inequality. Crisis, on the other hand, would mean clinging to outdated notions of supremacy, leading to isolation and eventual decline. The hook here is unmistakable. The future global role of the United States depends less on its ability to impose power and more on its willingness to share it. This crossroads moment also demands a new kind of political courage. Too often, American leaders have been trapped in the cycles of election politics, prioritizing short-term wins over long-term vision. But the challenges now pressing against the nation require leaders capable of thinking beyond the next news cycle, of daring to pursue policies that may not yield immediate applause, but will secure future generations. Renewal depends on a recalibration of values, one where integrity, wisdom, and foresight replace cynicism and opportunism. The hook that should capture every citizen's attention is this: the quality of leadership chosen today will determine whether America navigates the storm ahead or is consumed by it. The choice between crisis and renewal is not theoretical. It is playing out in the present, in every budget passed, in every foreign policy decision made, and in every debate about how resources are used. Each decision either adds weight to the burden of decline or strengthens the foundation for renewal. The awareness of this choice should not inspire despair, but urgency, because it proves that America still holds the power to redirect its course. The clock is ticking, the stakes are immense, and the direction chosen now will define not just America's future, but the global order itself.